One of the things I'm committed to doing is helping young students, get Wabash interns, experience in the IT business. Wabash really primarily focuses on liberal arts, but a lot of times there's a big need for technology services. And so a lot of these students, after they graduate from their liberal arts experience, they get technology experience as well. Next slide. I've got a lot of senior strategic advisors that help me. Cam is actually based out in California, and he's got a lot of experience with the automotive industry, telco, and AI, and he's worked extensively with Ericsson and Verizon, and he co-founded a car company. So he's a good strategic advisor and has helped open a lot of doors for me. Next slide, please. Ashley Walters is another strategic advisor. She's worked extensively with Fortune 500 companies and has also worked with many manufacturers. She's a Purdue grad, and she's worked with many leadership teams to put people, priorities, and plans together in place to help them achieve their goals. Next slide, please. Carrie is also on the faculty of our meeting today, and she's got much experience in data centers, and she's got 40 plus certifications, and she's a huge advocate for women in tech. She also serves as a fractional CTO to many companies and has also done a lot of response to make available to our clients. So she's also available to work, as a CTO, as a fractional, if any of the companies that need a potential resource. Next slide, please. So Leonard McDowell works as a smart partner with Nebulon. And one of the reasons we've done that is because they've achieved so much success very quickly. They've achieved the 2021 Big 50 startup. They've also been recognized as one of the edge computing startups of the year. So we're very pleased to be partnered up with Nebulon. So with that, let's go ahead and tee up some of the polling questions, and that'll help facilitate Carrie having a discussion after we get some of these results. And we'll give you about 30 seconds to respond to these. It may not even take that long.
Yeah, and I think, the important thing is we look through these poll questions and sort of figure out where everybody is. There was a time when people sort of predicted that everything would go to the cloud, and then there were people that dug their heels in and said, my stuff will never go to the cloud. And realistically, we figured out that some people that had a cloud first strategy are now repatriating their data and bringing it back on premise, or at least some of that. And we're seeing a lot more mixed infrastructure architectures. We're seeing multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, a little bit of everything. And so the idea really here is to figure out the best place for your data and the best place to house whatever your application is going to need, and understand that they're not all going to be the same. And so most companies end up with some kind of a combined strategy. There might be a little bit of software as a service, maybe with a Salesforce platform or something that you're using, or some other cloud-based tools like Slack. But there's also the ability to bring some of that in-house. And as cloud spend continues to increase, people are really looking to bring some of that data back, because obviously moving that data into the cloud costs nothing, but moving around in the cloud and downloading anything or pulling anything back out of the cloud is where that expense comes in. So if we look at this particular poll question, we can see that we've got kind of a good mix. But again, back to that, there's no one size fits all. There's about 62% that are in some combination of public and private cloud. And I would venture to say there's probably some multi-cloud in those responses as well. And so one of the things that we've seen, certainly with IT professionals, is the more people use cloud, the more intelligent they get about how cloud operates, how to set up security properly, how to do all of those kind of things. And so it makes it really easier to have those tools available. And that's one of the things that's kind of exciting about this Nebulon platform, is it's a lot of the same sort of look and feel of what you're used to. You're just doing it on your own environment. And so I think that certainly is a benefit. If we want to pop up that second poll question, please, Sierra, and sort of see some of the use cases and applications that we see, and what problems people are facing. And so when we think of repatriating data and we think about people that are pulling things out of the cloud, latency is certainly one issue. We want to make sure that the data is available. Slow is the new down, as they say. So performance and latency are definitely part of that. I think ease of management is something that everybody wants. More of a single pane of glass, less places to have to manage from to make things easier, and certainly great vendor support. When we think about putting things at the edge specifically, we know that we can make those environments much more resilient, which takes off some of the power burdens that we have in data centers, because we can fail over from one site to the next, for instance, and that actually gets you better resilience, because then you have also geographic diversity. And so those things come into play. Availability and uptime is something that everybody's worried about, although you'd be surprised if you really looked at your applications and said, what if this application went down for a few minutes? Then that might give you a little bit different solution about where you park that application. It may not need that 5 nines of time. It might be something that if it went down for 10 minutes, it would be kind of not great, but it wouldn't be earth shattering. So right sizing availability, I think, is also a potential cost savings here. And then of course, total cost of ownership and density, and trying to make sure that whatever solution you have is going to work within your existing vendors, and make sure that as you go through sorting this out, you see what really becomes important, and you can certainly see it on here. Total cost of ownership is something that's always important, and people that have really been bit by cloud spend, this becomes a very high priority. And so it's launched brand new things like FinOps, which is, that position does nothing except figure out where your data sits and how you can manage that cost better. And certainly we didn't have compliance in this list, but compliance would also be a big choice when you're figuring out where you're going to operate this. And so looking at all of these, I think the same things sort of continuously float to the top, right? We want high availability. We want to be able to control latency. We want good performance and ease of management. And then if we throw up our next poll question, there's only 3, so this is the last time we're going to task you guys with filling in these polls. So cloud-like features that you wish you could enjoy on your on-prem. And so remote fleet management would certainly be part of that. Software updates as a service, and that fleet management is your fleet of machines, not necessarily your fleet of vehicles. There's some differences there, although you can absolutely use a cloud-based application to do your fleet management too. Software updates being automated and not consistent and continuous. That's one thing that can definitely sidetrack a good implementation, is having to do continuous updates. And then try to make sure that whatever your insights are actionable. They're definitely API driven and takes a lot of the human intervention out. And then self-service application provisioning, being able to flip all of those as you need, or maybe just doing all of the above. And certainly I think it's important, and you guys are welcome to write in the chat window if there's other ones that we're missing on, because as we turn this over for the demo, those might be questions that can be answered in the demo. But whether you do things on site or off site or some combination of the above, I think that it's really important to make sure that all of these things are addressed. And so as you start figuring out these new architectures, it's certainly important, I think, to get demos. And I think it's really important to look at how reactive any of these applications are. So, how fast you can scale, how quick you can do things, how quick you can turn up an instance, all of those are part of that. And Nebulon, because there's a little bit of configuration that needs to take place, obviously making sure that that's easy. and being able to control those costs for whatever you're doing to make sure that this software is going to provide you what you need to be able to support your business and be able to control some of that cloud spend so that you're not overspending in the cloud. And with that, I am going to turn it back over. Sierra?
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Carrie. Great discussion. And at this time, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Tobias. That was a great discussion and great feedback and input to know what's going on in the marketplace. Now we've got an opportunity to introduce Tobias Flitch, and he's excellent and doing a great job as Director of Product Marketing. And so, Tobias, why don't you go ahead and take us through the latest updates on product innovation, and he's also going to give us a demo. So thank you, Tobias. Take it from here.
Absolutely. Thank you, Frank. Thanks for the introduction. So again, my name is Tobias Flitch, head of product here at Nebulon, and the next couple of minutes, half an hour, I'm gonna talk a little bit more in depth about Nebulon and what it's all about. So when you are an IT infrastructure owner or IT infrastructure manager, you have many options when it comes to your infrastructure for your applications. You can leverage a 3-tier architecture that consists of an enterprise storage array, a storage fabric, and of course servers. And in this architecture, the storage array can be software-defined storage, or it can be a traditional hardware-based storage array. Another option is hyperconverged infrastructure software, and that collapses the compute and storage onto the same computing device. Another option is, of course, to eliminate on-premises infrastructure altogether and run all workloads in a public cloud or multiple public clouds. In fact, your organization may actually have a cloud-first strategy, which means that every workload, goes to the cloud first. Now, since cloud has been around for quite some time now, most of us understand that there are reasons to run workloads in a public cloud, and there are reasons when not to. We understand that not every workload can or should run in a public cloud, and therefore starts on premises or migrates from the cloud to on-prem infrastructure. And this is the case when you, for example, process data at the edge for lower latency and when you want to deliver immersive user experiences, or when you need to overcome issues with unreliable network connections in remote locations, for example, or if you need caching infrastructure, ingest points for data flows, or cloud gateways. So the last option of moving everything to a public cloud may not be reasonable or even possible, and you're looking at a minimum at a hybrid approach. Now, for the on-premises infrastructure component, in your architectures, you will have to decide what infrastructure to use for what use case. And when doing so, you want to ensure that you get as close as possible to the easiest operational experience, that of a public cloud, because you don't want to spend all of your time on patching the firmware of the underlying physical infrastructure, such as, the individual physical drives. And you want to instead focus on value generating tasks. But when you run traditional on-premises infrastructure, you may find it quite difficult to get the same operational experience that you'll get from a public cloud. And the key issue is the supporting on-prem infrastructure. Because existing on-prem solutions were not designed to deliver the public cloud experience on-prem, enterprises are really challenged with slow application deployments, and that is due to the lack of the specialized resources that are required in every team. Think about you being an expert in data storage fabrics and enterprise storage arrays and their configuration, their troubleshooting, and their tuning. The same for networking, and of course the same for your servers and server hardware, and add that to the skill sets that you require for applications. And there is a clear trend of generalization in IT where individuals know more about many different technologies, but are no longer experts in just one very particular subject. Organizations are also challenged with high infrastructure management overhead, where the IT organization has to manage on a per device level, lacks end-to-end insights, and is mostly occupied with these mundane tasks such as firmware and software updating. With little insights into what's going on across many sites, for example, in distributed environments, it's quite difficult to identify systematic issues or whether it's really a unique failure situation. Now, additionally, service staff often needs to travel on site to maintain and manage infrastructure. And if the recent pandemic isn't bad enough, right, it made having on-site staff a lot more difficult. And it showed that it may actually not be possible in every situation. Now, when it comes to infrastructure choices, there is the expensive 3-tier architecture that can be very complicated to manage and is slow to deploy. And this is actually one of the reasons why having expert staff on site is required. The alternative to 3-tier architectures is, of course, hyperconverged infrastructure software, which is restrictive. It limits workload density because of CPU, memory, and the networking overheads on the server, and it lacks support for native workloads that are outside of virtualization. You always have a hypervisor in these solutions. So organizations that want to future-proof their infrastructure and they want to achieve higher infrastructure density, they will have to work with the complexities and the costs that are associated with 3-tier architectures if they don't want to be constrained by those limits. Now, at Nebulon, it is our mission to bring the benefits of the public cloud on premises from the core data center to the enterprise edge for really any application, whether it's bare metal, whether it's native containers, in, for example, Kubernetes, and of course, in virtualized environments. We enable IT organizations to deploy, manage, and maintain on-premises enterprise application data at scale as simply and as rapidly as it would be in a public cloud. Now, Nebulon is a cloud-based software company, and we're delivering a new category of smart infrastructure. And smart infrastructure is really all around us. Think smart home technology like Google Nest as an example. And what they all have in common is a cloud-based control plane. They're managing IoT endpoints in smart devices. Now, with that approach, users get benefits like easy remote management, automatic software updates, and of course, simple automation. And this idea is not new for the data center. In networking, you have Meraki Networks, which is now a Cisco, who pioneered efforts in cloud management and smart network infrastructure. With that approach, they basically solved the problem of managing large amounts of access points and switches that are scattered across the campus or the data center. Now, smart infrastructure applied to application infrastructure, specifically compute and storage infrastructure, is what we at Nebulon do. And with that, we solve similar issues around managing a large amount of application infrastructure, but in your data center, or if you have distributed environments at the edge. Now, think about managing all of your on-premises infrastructure, whether it's in your data center or at the edge, from the cloud. So with Nebulon Smart Infrastructure comes the benefits of a cloud experience, a public cloud-like operating model for your on-prem application infrastructure. Now, what do we do? So basically, we have taken the management stack that would traditionally live with the on-premises infrastructure, as you would see it with your hyperconverged infrastructure or your storage arrays or your servers today. And we moved it to the cloud where Nebulon ensures that it's always up to date. It delivers new capabilities on demand, and you as a customer, you don't have to maintain any of that. Think of this as your Gmail account. It's just there, and you get new capabilities all the time. This is also where we do anonymous analytics, where you as an individual customer, you can benefit from the collective insights and the experience of other smart infrastructure customers, including proactive issue notifications and predictive issue prevention. Think one customer experienced an issue, right? We can learn from that and prevent any other customers with similar infrastructure to run into the same problem. So what remains on-prem is the lightweight data plane software that is embedded in a PCIe card in your on-prem application server. We call that a services processing unit, or SPU in short. Now, this data plane provides the necessary enterprise data services for application servers. Think the services that you get from your enterprise storage array, plus server orchestration and operating system provisioning services. This SPU, this PCIe card, connects multiple application servers together to form application clusters for high availability and, of course, for scaling capacity and for scaling performance. I'll go into the details in a little bit, but what is important to understand at this point is that the management and the control of infrastructure is served in the cloud, and it's maintained by Nebulon, while your private data that is written by your applications remains on-prem in your control using the services processing unit data plane, that provides secure shared and local enterprise block storage services for your applications on your servers. Now, the first question that we usually get right here is this secure? So let's talk about that really quickly. Now, as I said, your private data remains in your server, in your data center, and only metadata that describes your service and that describes the data services is in the cloud. So, you can ensure that, you are in control over your private and personal information. Only you who has access to networking, to network of your infrastructure through, for example, a VPN, can make modifications to your infrastructure. This also precludes Nebulon from making any changes to your infrastructure, for example. Now, this is achieved through Nebulon's security triangle, and we can spend hours just talking about that. We have, of course, spent some time on writing a security white paper where you can read all about this. But in essence, the focus here was really that no third party on the internet can really make modifications to your on-premises infrastructure. Everything is encrypted. Traffic between cloud and infrastructure, browser and cloud, browser and infrastructure, as well as the persistence layers in the cloud, as well as all of your private data inside of your servers. It is really always-on encryption in flight and at rest. We also provide granular role-based access control and auditing, so you can limit access to only the people that you want, and you can closely monitor who is doing what with your infrastructure. Now, we have, of course, compiled a complete security white paper that goes into, into the depths of security. And if you're concerned about security, I recommend you give it a read, and we can have a follow-up discussion on that. In any case, we believe that our security measures, with our security measures that we have in place, management is no less secure as your on-prem management station, but you gain the benefits of a public cloud experience. Now, let me talk about those. Now, there are basically three key items we solve for IT organizations with on-prem infrastructure across core and the edge today. Let's first talk about self-service infrastructure provisioning. Now, a key challenge for IT organizations with their on-prem infrastructure is being able to quickly respond to new product initiatives, and then to deliver the necessary IT services to support the product teams and to support the application owners. Now, with traditional approaches, on-prem infrastructure provision is rather slow. And the reasons for it are often organizational barriers, but mostly because traditional on-prem infrastructure is not really built to deliver the same experience as a public cloud would. With a public cloud experience, the problem is solved by putting the application owner into the driver's seat by allowing them to provision their own infrastructure. Now, with Nebulon, this is done by means of a service catalog. The service catalog defines what operating system to deploy, what application, and then the right data storage services for the application. And having a service catalog makes infrastructure provisioning quick, reliable, and repeatable. What that means is that, the IT organization can build a catalog of services that meet the company guidelines, and then the application owner can provision services and scale these services rapidly at the core or the enterprise edge, wherever they're necessary. And they can then do that consistently and without ever having to involve the IT team. So no longer waiting for these IT tickets to be addressed. Now, once infrastructure is provisioned, it's all about keeping it running and optimizing it for changing needs. Workloads usually don't stay the same. They evolve with the project. And with Nebulon's cloud analytics, we can monitor and predict changes and give you valuable insights into your infrastructure that is really relevant for your configuration changes, for sizing activities or other planning activities. And the same insights can be used by the control plane as part of command execution. Now, since every command passes through the cloud can intercept actions that are possibly harmful or misguided and guide the user to making the right choices. So you don't have to be an expert when it comes to every single piece of technology, as the cloud is your assistant. Another major challenge for IT organizations managing large infrastructure is keeping firmware and software current. A central pain point in navigating through in doing so is navigating through compatibility lists and then identifying the right mix of versions and then rolling them out across many devices or clusters. And in fact, during updates is where your infrastructure is most at risk because there could be an unfound incompatibility, right? But on the flip side, if you don't do updates frequently, you leave your infrastructure exposed to risks. If you look at some of the release notes of any vendor, you can see that there's so many issues that are being addressed in every single one of those releases. If you don't keep up, these issues are obviously buried inside of your infrastructure. So it is good if you do regular and frequent updates to keep your infrastructure stable. Now, let's have a closer look at this firmware and software management with Nebulon Smart Infrastructure, specifically updates. As I just mentioned, traditionally this is a time-consuming task, requires careful planning and has to be done device by device. However, updates become quite simple if the majority of the software actually runs in the cloud and is provided as a service and maintained by Nebulon. So you don't have to worry about that. You only have to update the bare minimum in your infrastructure on-prem, and you can do that centrally and non-disruptively. And that's the data plane. And you are in control over when the update happens. You can easily identify which version your infrastructure is running, centrally of course, and by literally a click of a button, you can bring them all to your desired or the Nebulon recommended version. Right? Internally, the update process ensures that there's no disruption to application workloads by doing a rolling update. However, different application clusters across, for example, distributed or a large-scale environment are updated in parallel. And you don't have to log into each of these clusters or their management interface individually. You can initiate this update centrally from the cloud, and you can monitor the progress of the update centrally as well. Now, this is especially handy in edge use cases where you have infrastructure that is scattered across the country or the globe. Right. So your operational overhead is heavily reduced if you have the necessary insights into your infrastructure, if you have fleet management capabilities, and you no longer have to deal with the complexities of firmware and software updates. Now, every larger organization has invested in some form of automation of their infrastructure. Some are quite advanced, others are still adjusting to this new paradigm. But in any case, it's done for the same core reasons. Reducing risk by eliminating these error-prone manual provisioning task and the associated downtime and the delays with new projects. Reducing labor and infrastructure costs by improving resource utilization, uptime, and therefore operational velocity. Another one is improved decision making, and that is done by automating infrastructure instrumentation, and gaining real-time actionable intelligence. Now, it turns out that this is not very easy to do with on-prem infrastructure. It is a lot easier to do with a public cloud because there's just a single API endpoint and it's consistent across all services in the cloud. On-prem, every device has their own API endpoint, their own version, and their own functional level. And all of that needs to be accounted for when writing scripts or automation workflows. And you're always updating software in your infrastructure, which means that the chances are very high that infrastructure APIs run at different functional levels. But with the Nebulon Cloud Control Plane, it's just one API, one version that works and it scales for the entire enterprise. That makes reporting and automation so much easier and helps organizations achieve infrastructure as code and doing more with less. And I hope you can see that these are properties of a public cloud experience, but they are available for on-prem. And what is required in addition just to the cloud control plane is also a data plane that can securely enable cloud management and also delivers the necessary data services for your applications. So the other ingredient to bringing the public cloud experience to on-prem is a data plane that supports any application, anywhere, and gives you better control over infrastructure. Now, there are lots of reasons why certain applications and data is kept on-prem and is not in a public cloud. There are also many reasons why a particular application is using virtualization, whether it's using containers or Kubernetes, or it's running as a bare metal application on infrastructure. Now, we've seen some customers running a single virtual machine on a VMware host, so they get automation benefits. But ideally, right, that in-memory database inside that virtual machine uses 100% of the server's memory, and it's not giving anything up to a middle layer. Yet to talk about the licenses, right? So limiting your infrastructure to support just one type of workload will come with challenges, specifically since it restricts developers and product teams in terms of design and architecture, or it fragments your infrastructure technologies. So your IT organization will have to support different technologies for different purposes. So in order to quickly react to changing needs, infrastructure that is hypervisor agnostic, that is operating system independent, and that brings versatility to infrastructure is desired. That gives you really the freedom of easily shifting services and support the needs of the different application teams that you're supporting. You, of course, also want to have a cost-effective infrastructure that delivers the same data services in different deployment scenarios, where it's in the core data center or enterprise edge, or if it's a hosted service. And the only thing that really changes is the size. So the benefit of that is if an application that is developed in the core can be easily rolled out at the edge, right, just at a smaller scale, but it still receives the same enterprise data services as during development. Now, this is achieved by having the data plane embedded into the server on a PCIe endpoint. Now, this is quite different from hyperconverged infrastructure because the infrastructure software is not running on the server. It's not using the server CPU and memory. It's making use of an embedded PCIe card. That gives you higher density because you don't have, an external storage array, for example, and you don't have to compensate for the CPU and the memory and the networking overhead of software-defined storage, having you to buy more servers. And then lastly, and quite importantly, full control over the boot device and separation of the data from the operating system is needed. This is really what enables customers to quickly alter the personality of servers from one application cluster to another. This is what enables customers to deploy application clusters with operating system, application, and data volumes, in just a few minutes. And this is what enables customers to remotely update clusters without service disruption. And that is because the data plane on the PCIe card is not impacted when the operating system or the hypervisor reboots or fails or undergoes maintenance. Now, at this point, right, this is quite abstract, and I understand a lot to cover. So let me quickly give you a short demo of the Nebulon Cloud Control Plane, specifically the user interface. So I've switched over here to the UI. So you should see a browser window right now, and this is our graphical web user interface in the cloud. Now, all that I'm showing in the next couple of minutes is also available via API, right? So in fact, our UI is using our API. So anything that you can do with our infrastructure, you can do manually with a graphical user interface, or you can script and include in your automation routines and workflows. So what we're looking at here is I'm logged into our demo org here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a new application cluster, right? And all I have to do when setting up a new application cluster is click on Create NPod. I select my servers, right? And you can see I have a couple of ProLiant servers selected here. I select a template. Let's create a database, a cockroach database in this case. I set up networking. In this case, I'm using LACP for redundancy. And then I give this database a name, database, and then I can assign it to one of my security groups. Now, when I click on validate, what this is really doing, it is doing the security triangle. And I talked about this earlier. The security triangle verifies that I'm authorized to make this change of infrastructure. 2, it ensures that I'm connected to the infrastructure. In fact, I'm on VPN right now, so I can actually talk to the infrastructure. If I would disconnect my VPN at this point, right, this operation would fail. And then it's also validating all of my input parameters. So the networking IPs that I've supplied, are they according to best practices? Does my template actually work with the physical infrastructure that I have? And what is the best layout of the of data? What's the best layout to get most efficiency out of the selected infrastructure? Now, the validation takes a bit of time because it's running a couple of checks in the background. And I see there's a question coming in, what is the best layout for the data? That depends on your application, the template that I selected in the service catalog. And actually, let me show you that in a second, right? So the best data layout is really defined by what type of application you're provisioning. In this case, I selected a Cockroach DB, and Cockroach DB is one of those databases that does its own high availability, right? The application itself does replication across multiple servers. So we don't need to have the same replication on the storage layer, right? However, if you're running VMware, for example, right? VMware in and by itself doesn't do replication of VMs. Well, there's options for that, of course, but it relies on the storage to be highly available, right? So if I would run a VMware cluster, in that case, we would create mirrored volumes and, volumes that are shared across all of the nodes in the cluster. So really, the best practice and the best layout of the data is infused into the NPod templates, into the service catalog, right? So that me as an application owner who is creating a new cluster, I just have to pick the template, whether it's CockroachDB, VMware, Kubernetes, MongoDB, you name it, right? The right best data layout for that application is applied. All right. So I've just created this database, and if we so this application cluster with database, and just that you can see that I'm not cheating here. Right now, there's nothing on this URL, so nothing is yet provisioned. And if I click into this database that we've just created, you can see that it's using the 4 servers that I've selected during the provisioning. We can see a little bit of more detail about the service. It's not just looking at data pieces. You can see information about your service in terms of memory, CPU. You see the SPU details. This is the PCIe card that's embedded into the server and attached to your drives. And of course, right, you see all of the information about the drives that you need for support cases. And these drives are really what's used for data storage, right? So there's no capacity on the SPU or this PCIe card. It's using the same drives of your service that you get from your server vendor, like the same read-intensive commodity drives that are available from your vendor. Nothing special here. It's not self-encrypting drives, etc. It's standard off-the-shelf drives. Now, we just talked about data layout, and you can see that in this case, it has created 8 volumes. That is basically what the service catalog in combination with the selected hardware yielded. In this case, it was provisioning 4 operating system volumes, each one of them associated with one of the 4 hosts, and then 4 data volumes. And you can see it's using the maximum capacity of the servers for those. Why just 4? And why are they just available to these individual servers? Well, that's what CockroachDB wants. And CockroachDB, of course, in this example, runs on Linux. But if you would do a VMware cluster, right, each of those volumes would be accessible by any host because VMware wants to have shared access to storage, right? All right, so if we just have a quick look at metrics, right, you can see that there's actually something going on here in the background. So if you look at the throughput here, you can see there's something going on, right? I just created an application cluster. Why is there, some workload going on right there? And that is, if I look at the template that I just used, right, this CockroachDB template, it is using a boot image, right? And this boot image is basically a pre-provisioned image that, as you would in the public cloud in the service catalog, that contains the application binaries, the operating system, and some specific pieces for customization. So when I create this endpod, all of these servers are basically laid out with this operating system. And when the servers have done rebooting, you can see that I now have, one of them is still rebooting. I'm building an application cluster in my CockroachDB database, comes up. And once all of the 4 servers, right, there's the 4th node just coming in, we have an entire application cluster set up. So all I did in this environment is just pick my servers, pick a template from a service catalog that you can customize, and then supply some network configuration, and I have an entire bare metal database up and running in just a few minutes, right? This just looked at the time. This was less than 5 minutes for provisioning an entire infrastructure. Now, since this demo worked well, I have to sacrifice something to the demo gods, so let's delete this here right away, and what we will find is that also this database will be stopped responding, will be gone in immediate time, right away. All right, so let me flip back to the slides. So again, with the Nebulon Smart Infrastructure, you get benefits of the public cloud experience for any on-prem application, core to edge, with server embedded infrastructure delivered as a service. And that is done by combining a cloud control plane and an on-premises data plane. And with that, you get this self-service application infrastructure that I just showed you, where you can just easily provision your entire application cluster. You get infrastructure management as a service, where it is delivered to you by Nebulon. You don't have to maintain any of it. And you get enterprise-class shared and local block storage services. In my demo, I've just showed local block storage services, but similarly, you can get the same experience as you would from an external storage array. Now, where to get started? So there are a variety of examples on where you can start using smart infrastructure today, and here are just a couple. So when you're transforming your traditional virtualization environment into a hyperscale internal cloud, think about smart infrastructure as a way to do that consistently while maintaining the ease of management of day 1 on day 100. When you're operating distributed applications and distributed infrastructure, for example, at the edge, think of smart infrastructure as your opportunity to increase density and lower the cost of each site, enable remote management, centralized monitoring, and fleet management. If you're operating thousands of sites, every dollar, every piece of infrastructure optimization matters, and smart infrastructure is your tool to enable that. When you're a cloud service provider, smart infrastructure enables you to deliver and offer new services at a lower cost or at a higher margin, up to you, across both hosted and customer-owned data centers. And this is, of course, enabled by cloud management. Now, another good starting point is if you are migrating from the public cloud, if you've outgrown the cloud and is no longer cost effective, you want to bring your applications into your data center, but you're looking for a similar experience, the same ease of use, the same provisioning capabilities, the same monitoring capabilities as you get from the public cloud. Smart infrastructure can enable that for you. Now, for all of those use cases, application owners and product teams are put into the driver's seat, and they can self-service provision their own infrastructure from the bare metal rack to the full application stack on their own, accelerating time to value. There's massive gains when it comes to operational overhead, because through zero-touch remote fleet management with our cloud AI assistants and our API-first infrastructure management that is delivered as a service, you get the cloud-like operations for your on-prem infrastructure. By avoiding the expense of external storage arrays and avoiding the restrictions of hyperconverged infrastructure software, you gain significant efficiency and cost improvements for your infrastructure. And then lastly, with a solution that is operating system and application independent, you protect your investment for today and also in the future. Now, if you can get all of these benefits for your application workloads in your on-prem infrastructure, you no longer have to force applications into the cloud that are better served on-prem. You can start thinking about cloud as an operating model instead of just purely a destination. Now, this is just a brief introduction to Nebulon Smart Infrastructure, and I see there's lots going on the chat here. There's, of course, a lot more detail, and please reach out if you want to learn more. Check out our online demo where you can drive smart infrastructure on your own. You can schedule a remote proof of concept, and check out our resources on nebulon.com. In any case, thank you for now. And I do think that there is some time for some questions. And I think we also have to announce some prize winners. So let me just quickly go into the chat and see if there's any questions for me. I don't know if, Frank, did you observe any particular questions that you wanted to have answered live?
Yeah,
Otherwise,
I
I'll
know
just browse.
Manoj was having a lot of interaction with you back and forth. Let's just see if there's any additional questions that Manoj was trying to address with you in the chat box. Do you want to see what was there?
Absolutely. All right. So the first question that I see that I haven't seen while presenting, what about Linux apps? Right. So in this case, in my demo, this was actually CockroachDB on Linux, right? We do have support for Linux-based applications. We do have support for VMware. We're on the HCL for VMware, and we have also just completed our certification with Windows Server. So also your Hyper-V use cases, your Microsoft SQL Server, and your Microsoft-based applications are covered. And really that is enabled by us being independent of the operating system. There's no custom driver to be installed. There's no multipathing configuration required, right? None of that is there, so we work with off-the-shelf operating systems. What happens if a PCIe card fails, and do I need one card in every server? Right. So think of the PCIe card similar to your fiber channel HBA if you have an external storage array, right? If your HBA goes down, right, you will on that host lose access to the data. But there's multiple different levels of protection. So for example, if the card internally fails, it goes into pass-through and accesses storage from another SPU in a different server, right? And yes, you would have one card in every server that is part of an application cluster. Again, think of this as your fiber channel HBA. If you don't have a fiber channel HBA in your server, or if you don't have a network card in your server using iSCSI, you can't access any of the storage in that particular server. It's the equivalent of that. Do you have a provision to customize? Yes, we do. You can customize the endpoint templates. In fact, you can customize all of the settings on how data is laid out. You can optimize, data reduction. You can optimize all of that. And the idea is that the IT infrastructure does that, builds it into the template, and then you're just vending application clusters from that template. And every time you have a change in the requirements, right? So for example, you have now a different requirement for data protection, you update the template, and every time any user is now provisioning infrastructure, they're immediately compliant with your new settings.
Tobias, it seems like there are quite a few questions. Would you be opposed to sharing your email if people wanted to follow up with you directly?
Actually, that sounds like a good idea. I'm looking at the clock here. Of course, we want to hand out some prizes there as well. So yeah, if you want to reach out, it's Tobias at nebulon.com. And I thank you, Sierra, to sharing that in the chat. Yeah, reach out, send me an email, and we can schedule some time with you and go into much more depth about the technology and address your personal use cases. With that, Frank, I'll hand it over back to you.
No, thank you very much, Tobias. I think you covered a lot of ground quickly, and obviously we could set up another demo, and we'd love to have you guys and all the audience that participated. Thank you very much for your time. And now I'd like to announce the 3 random draws that will receive these awards, and we'll follow up with you on email and get your prizes shipped off to you. So one of the first award winners was Darshak Vasalia, and Darshak's going to win a $200 Amazon gift card. Congratulations, Darshak. The next winner is Sean Black. He's going to win an Apple TV. And the third and final winner is Martin Chen, and he's going to win Apple AirPods Pro. So again, we appreciate everybody that's participated. So thanks again. And again, we'd love to have you follow up if you have interest in a demo, or if you know anybody else that might benefit from the Nebulon technology, please reach out to us. And we hope to do another one of these, perhaps later this quarter. So thank you again for participating, and have a great afternoon.